How's your day going?
Yeah, I'm okay. I don't even know. I feel like I'm having a real year. Not even a day, it's like
Yeah,
the whole year. So yeah, I've kind of like snapped a couple of times today. We've got a little puppy, and I feel like right now I live on the edge of a breakdown at all points. And
mm.
so the tiniest thing is enough, you know? And so I have a
Dude,
nice
I so
puppy. They
relate to
don't
that.
understand anything. And like, so I'm honestly like this far away from like finding out we have ran out of milk and I need to go to the store. I'm just going to lie on the floor and cry.
Yeah,
That's how I feel 24/7 for like the last couple of months. And it's exhausting. So
dude,
yeah.
I can totally relate to that. Yeah, I appreciate you even being like that transparent. Like I feel that on a deep level. So we have a puppy as well, not quite as
Okay.
young as yours, but I mean, even last night I lost my shit because I go downstairs after leaving him alone for a bit, and he's potty trained. And lo and behold, he left a present in our kitchen.
Yeah.
I was like, are you kidding me? So, yep.
All those two steps forward, one step back as well. And yeah, all that. And then it's fireworks tonight. So that's a big thing in the UK, Guy Fawkes night. We celebrate the time the
Oh,
guy didn't manage to overthrow the government, but tried. I don't know how it works, but yeah. So yeah, I'm cheering for Guy. Let's overthrow the government. I feel like we need another one. But that's gonna be crazy with our dog. I mean, like basically 4th of July or whatever, you know, like tiny puppy
right.
doesn't understand, lots of explosions going on everywhere. So I'm braced for a day. So I'm excited for this because it's like a nice like escape from my real world that is just a lot right now. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I get to just hang out and have a laugh. My wife is looking after the dog. I'm like, I'm here. I am 100% here. Um, yeah, no, I'm stoked.
How's everything been going with your health stuff? I know that, that was a challenge for a bit, and
Yeah,
the doctors were
it's
unsure.
kind of still all there. They think maybe, well, I don't know. I think it's linked to some trauma stuff that I'm trying to start to unpack and trying to figure out, and that's probably a big part of the overwhelm. It kind of all feels like this one big package. Like I've kind of really burned out, but they've got me referred to an ADHD specialist. They think I've got ADHD.
Oh, dude,
Um,
I actually do too. So we
okay.
can chat about that at,
because
whenever. I mean,
that's huge for me, like just understanding that more, looking at different accounts. I'd actually noticed when because I didn't follow you, I followed the Your Favorite Heretics, but I didn't follow you. I went to follow you, like we're all following the same like ADHD
yes,
Instagrams, but following those accounts and going, oh god,
yes.
this is me, holy shit.
Holy
um
shit. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
so just understand that and understanding the components of like burning out and overwhelm and different things and how that plays in with that aspect. I'm like,
Yes.
oh, this is why I was like this all the way through school. Oh, this is like why I was like this in my first marriage. Oh, this is why I'm like this right now. Like just starting to understand and not to like just lay blame so I can ignore it, but to be going, oh, I need to kind of figure out how to navigate that. But now there's potentially tools there and resources if that's something that I can engage with. It might make my life a bit easier. So there's different things, trauma, ADHD, whatever. I'm slightly autistic as well. So there's like all sorts of different components that all stack against me not doing well when I get overwhelmed, when things don't go my way,
Absolutely. Oh
loads of
my
different stuff.
gosh.
So yeah.
Phil, yeah, no, I mean, and even you sharing that now, like I mean, there's even a deeper level of empathy because being neurodivergent, like um it's hard for people who are neurotypical to understand some of the overwhelmed, like being the overstimulated feeling, right? The
Yes.
like, there's loud noise going on over here and someone's talking to you, and then you've got something going on, a train of thought running through your brain, and someone's trying to call you, and then it's like this perfect storm of stimulation, and it's like and then it
Right.
just takes one little thing to just boom, and the response on the surface is like, whoa, this is disproportionate to whatever you're upset about. And
Big
then in
time.
reality, it's like, oh my gosh, actually, no, like, but you don't understand. Like, this is all that's going on the inside that you don't like. And for me, I mean, that's been so hard, honestly, really challenging, like the emotional dysregulation. A big one that has been eye-opening for me as well is like, you know, uh, just rejection dysphoria is another big one. Like just any sort of hint of rejection can send me like in a place downward to where I feel really like really, really deeply sad and hurt. And I mean, it's a combination of ADHD and also trauma, like you were talking about. And then I think too, man, like for one of the hardest struggles on a consistent basis is like the whole forgetfulness piece. Like just so much shame around that. Like, man, like I could, write it down, or it could be in my calendar, or I can talk to whatever, or, it could even be minutes that go by and like I forget. And, the whole concept of time typically with neurodivergent people, it's like, it's either now or not now. Like there's just no concept of, and like
100%.
And for me, it's all I am is in the moment. And so that can be good, but it can also be like really bad.
Right.
Oh man, I forgot that I, left my coffee in the microwave, or it could be little things, but then it can be bigger things, obviously. So yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying.
My wife was like, I've been sending her nonstop, like different like clips of videos or reels or like little like, infographics or whatever. And she's like dying with laughter. She's like, this is you. But my favorite bit out of all of it so far. So the way we do like our healthcare stuff here is a bit of a mess right now, because it is great. It's all free. It's wonderful, but it's quite slow because our government's slowly trying to sell off our whole healthcare system and privatize it, which is a pain in the ass. So everything's much slower. It's much more underfunded and all that different stuff. So I'm on this huge wait list and things like that for ADHD checking and stuff like that. But it was funny because I had to fill in some forms, and in it was like the questionnaire they have for ADHD. And, like you look through the questions and you're like, oh my God, this is hilarious. But one of them is, and you'll notice, is like, you easily forget things, especially things that are important, but not massive hits of dopamine to you, right? So not particularly interesting or whatever. And I gave that into my GP and blah, blah, blah. My GP calls me the next day and goes, hey, Phil, you forgot to sign the form. And I was like, well, I guess we can underline the very often kind of component of forgetting important things. I'm just like, I forgot to sign the form of the questionnaire. Do I have ADHD? Like, yeah, that's it. I'm not reading every single word to find out, oh, here I'm supposed to, that was a pretty obvious one you should have seen, but
that was the extra credit question that
yeah, I got 19 out of 18.
Exactly.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's just wild.
I know for me in school, and I don't know if you related to this, but like it still happens to this day with certain things as well, but like sometimes I see like instructions and my mind just like shuts down, and so I'll like skim over it and feel like I understood it, but then realize I really didn't read the instructions very well, or so.
That's me today. Kind of, not even at school. That's like right now. I still do.
Oh yeah,
it drives my wife insane.
Yeah.
As the IKEA bookcase is like completely upside down and back to front or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that stresses me out for sure.
So all this like you've got a fair few different components going on as far as neurodivergency and then components of like mental health stuff as well. Like, was that something that you were aware of before you started to start deconstructing your faith and exploring beyond kind of bounds of conventionality? So I'm just kind of like seamlessly going in. I don't even know what will keep it.
Yeah.
But
no, it's all good. I think for me, well, specifically with OCD, I didn't really have language for it until like 2 or 3 years ago. Like kind of, I feel like that's how a lot of people deconstruct too. It's like, oh, I've been going through this and I didn't realize that this was a thing, that's kind of how it was with some of the diagnoses that I had, and ADHD actually came first, about 4 or 5 years ago. And at the time it was like, okay, this makes sense. But then I kind of shelved it because I didn't take the time to really research it and understand it. And then time went on, and then a lot of the symptomology around my OCD and what I was experiencing was becoming very loud, if you will. Like it was affecting, things with the dynamic between Rachel and me. It was affecting just my overall mental health. And I think it was at that point, Rachel came to me and she's like, have you thought about maybe this isn't just general anxiety, which is what I was told, and that it could be actually OCD. And as soon as she said that, it was like kind of a light bulb moment. And I started to to dig into some stuff. And that was just really eye-opening to me. And then from there, slowly, it was finding sources of being educated around ADHD and neurodivergence. And so, I think that the more I understood how I'm wired and how my brain works, and even just some of the ways that trauma has affected those things and it exacerbated some of those symptoms, like it's helped me to understand that a lot of my experience isn't just circumstantial, but that there's a lot more going on. That it gives clarity, right? It gives a greater understanding. Oh, this is what I do. This is the reason, why I'm doing the things that I do. And this is why I forget things. This is why, I'm having themed intrusive thoughts causing anxiety that I can't just shake off. Like, I feel the need to solve them, which is called rumination. You're solving an unsolvable puzzle, if you will, or an unsolvable problem. And so what's really interesting is what OCD says is that, specifically around any sort of intrusive thoughts, there's usually a theme involved. For some people, it's health anxiety, which I've dealt with. Some people it can be contamination. It could be relationship OCD, which is what I've dealt with as well. Religious OCD, scrupulosity, which is what I've also dealt with. And harm OCD. I mean, there's a whole list of different forms of it. But it's usually centered around a theme, and it's really interesting and kind of sick and twisted of the brain, unfortunately, but it attacks what's most important to you. What's most valuable to you. It'll attack your value system. And so one of the things that you learn, in what's called ERP, exposure response prevention, which is the most effective form of treatment for OCD, is that you learn to be okay with uncertainty. You learn to accept that you can't have control over things that are out of your control. Like for me, there's times where I'm really scared of getting cancer and dying. It could be like, oh, I've got this ache and pain. Well, maybe it's, maybe I've got brain cancer. Like it's not like, oh, I just have a headache. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I will feel the need to try to solve this in my head. Like, oh, I didn't drink enough water, or maybe because I didn't sleep well enough, or this, that, and the other. And I'm running through this rumination in my head, trying to solve and reassure myself that I'm okay.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is when you do that, all you're doing is reinforcing your fears. And that's the twisted thing about ruminating, is that you think you're solving the problem. It's called a compulsion as well. So that's where obsessive compulsive disorder. So I don't think it's the most appropriate descriptor of a condition. However, the O in OCD, right, is the themed intrusive thoughts. You have no control over it. They just, for whatever reason, it's like, oh, I'm imagining that I'm going to take this knife over here and just go and harm myself. Well, I have no desire to do that, but I'm really scared that if I touch the knife, I'm just going to end up harming myself or harming someone else. Some people really struggle with that. And, the more and more I understand the ways that OCD affects us, for those who suffer with it, is that, we really just want that sense of security and certainty. But unfortunately, life doesn't promise that. And I think that kind of fits in with deconstruction. So in some ways, the more and more I'm learning to accept the uncertainty, that does carry over into different areas of deconstruction. And I know, I have harder times, harder weeks, harder months, but I'm kind of rambling now, but
it's an interesting dynamic. No, it's really good. And this is exactly what we want to talk about. This is, I could talk to you about 110 different things. I mean, you guys post amazing stuff constantly. But this is an area that like I don't get the opportunity to talk to many people about. And I think it's probably hugely undiagnosed. It's probably hugely misunderstood within the church. And it's an interesting dynamic though. You know, you talk about that search for certainty and security. And for a lot of people, religion gives them that. It
Right.
does, you know, it ticks those boxes. And yet for some people that have OCD and see it inflame, they don't see religion cure their desire for certainty and security. They actually see it inflame uncertainty. You know, we have a friend who certainly wouldn't call themselves someone that had a form of religious OCD, scrupulosity, or anything like that. They are deeply in the system. They are getting digger. They dig deeper and deeper and deeper every day. You know, the way out of this hole is with this spade, and that is how they operate. Wow. And it's really hard to see. Like, you know, they starve themselves through fasts. They come close to dying. You know, I mean, really horrendous stuff. The way they look after themselves is really awful. They don't look after themselves. They're not worth it. You know, there's almost this like self-flagellation, flogging yourself. I mean, really, really horrible things to see friends go through. And yet to talk to them and go, hey, maybe you have some of this, that would be a demonic attack. You know, that's just the devil trying to lie. So I'm less committed. So I'm less serious. And so, you know, for some people, while religion ticks the boxes of bringing some security and comfort, and that's a beautiful and wonderful thing. And I think we all deserve some form of comfort and security in our lives. For other people, and it seems often people with OCD that does bend towards religion, it focuses on those things we're most passionate about and most important in our life. And honestly, if we think that this is the way we're going to go to heaven and not go to hell, that's a pretty important one, right? I mean, it's not unlikely that that's going to be an important thing for us. Like, yeah. Talk to me about that dynamic. How does that play out? You know, I'll give an example of me looking on a friend that I care about, but I can't really do anything for. And honestly, would only make it worse trying to introduce this kind of concept, perhaps. You know, like, what did that look like for you within religion before you kind of maybe deconstructed, you know, before you had language for this stuff? Like,
absolutely.
What can it look like? So
for me, I went through some of the darkest times emotionally, mentally. I think I was on the brink of losing sanity. And I don't say that lightly. And it was really hard to experience because what I needed. Oh,
you good?
Oh, looks like my computer froze. Can you hear and see me okay?
I can hear and see you. You're great.
Okay.
Oh, I'll let you know if it does or anything, but you seem fine.
It's a little bit. I'm like looking at a frozen. My Zoom did this the other day, so I don't know why it's choosing to do so at this time. Gotta love it. So anyway, I guess what I was trying to say is that during that time, what I really needed was someone to be honest with me and say, hey, I think you need to see, you know, a professional. You need to see like a trained therapist who can really help you with this. But instead, and a lot of what happens in the church, the responsibility falls on the individual. God's testing your faith. God's causing you to suffer so that you can learn to lean on him and depend on him more, right? All those just really harmful things that people say, oh, it's spiritual attack, right? And I had someone who said, well, God must have a big calling on your life because, you know, this is the devil clearly trying to just, take you out or something like that, something along those lines. So it's this weird feeling where you're like, oh, this is you almost like develop this strange sort of like fetish for pain and suffering, and almost think it's like a badge of honor to go through horrific trauma. Like it was a traumatic few years, a couple years, I should say. God, I remember like, I mean, several moments of just breaking down to my friends in tears. I remember collapsing into my dad's arms at 21. And just being like, I don't want to live. And my dad's not a crier or emotional very feely person. I mean, he's compassionate and loving, but not like in that way, I guess. But he started to cry and like held me. And it was, but like the level of hopelessness and despair I felt in those moments through suffering with an undiagnosed mental health condition, it was bad. I mean, I went through, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but like steps to freedom, multiple times. And the premise of it, it's like a deliverance ministry curriculum. So you like fill out all these questions. Who do you need to forgive in your past? Think back to elementary school when you had a school bully who hurt you. You need to forgive them, write their name down. And there may be a stronghold in your past and an entryway for the enemy. And it's like, what? Like all these things that are so exhausting and so harmful. And I remember like, and then they take you through all these things and you're like reciting these prayers and renouncing stuff and like taking authority over shit. And it's this shadow boxing in order to do something that, you know, you're trying to, and then at the end, they look in my eyes and they try to call to attention any demonic spirits. I mean, this is like intense stuff. I didn't need someone to try to cast a demon out of me. I needed someone to lovingly hold and care for me and say, you know what? I think the most Christ-like thing I can do right now is to say, hey, there are people who are trained in this area that I think would benefit you so much.
Yeah.
That would have saved me, honestly, Phil. It would have saved me so much time suffering and hurting. I should have been on antidepressants at that point. I should have like been in a completely different treatment plan.
Yeah.
But I remember being in those moments where not just I feeling like internally tormented because I was convinced that because I didn't muster up enough faith and I wasn't sure that I was sure that I believed and trusted in Jesus, that he was going to come back during that time. I was going through this and he was going to like condemn me to hell. I had this warped vision that as I'm suffering, God would want to double down. And because I didn't have it together and I didn't muster up enough faith with my own willpower, that I was going to be condemned to hell. And I mean, talk about psychological warfare, like just absolute. I mean, I was living in a form of eternal torment, if you will, on earth. Yeah. Like it was horrible. Every day felt like it was gloomy and dark and cloudy. I felt like I didn't know how to be present in a moment and situations. I was constantly searching from, I was in Bible college at the time too. I was like begging my professors for reassurance that I was saved, that, I wasn't just going to fall away or whatever. And it just, the biggest thing that, again, I know I keep going back to is that had someone just had the foresight as a pastor or a friend, to say, hey, this is where my role stops and where I need to refer you to someone who can best love you and take care of you. But I mean, unfortunately, that it happens a lot, and not always from wrong intentions necessarily, but I think the church tries to play hero and savior. And that there's something, like you have a lack of faith or a lack of genuine spirituality if you admit that you need to have a therapist.
Yeah.
Or that you need to, have medication. So anyway, that period of my life was outrageously challenging. And had I known as well that it was OCD, would have been very interesting. I had some language for scrupulosity, but the most that I saw was that it was a very small window of people in like the Catholic Church that would just repeatedly go back to like confession over and over and over.
Sure.
And I dealt with that a lot too. Like even as I was dealing with these doubts, right? I thought it was just like, oh, I'm having my doubts. I was hunting and searching for every trace of sin so that I could make sure that God would approve of me and be proud of me and be pleased with me, and just like ceaselessly praying and confessing and repenting. And I just never had a moment of rest or respite. Like I was spiritually, emotionally exhausted. And yeah, it made me burn out in Bible college too. I never finished because of that.
Yeah.
I just was so burnt out, and being in that environment that was a very legalistic school was suffocating to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, all that to be said, a lot of the big things that, I was searching for was obviously this existential certainty. Like I was going to have security that I was saved, that I wasn't going to be rejected by God to an eternity of torment, like all these dark and horrible things. And I think what began to change for me is when I accepted uncertainty. And I think that continues to be a big answer to a lot of my struggle with OCD when it flares up is, and this is a lot of what my therapist has walked me through when I was in therapy for a good 6 months, really kind of like in boot camp, if you will, just like this intensive week in, week out exposure response prevention. She really helped me to come up with different mantras of, exposing myself to these different fears that I had and learning to accept the uncertainty, right? I could get cancer. I don't know. I can't know for sure. I can tolerate the uncertainty, and there's far more things that OCD accepts that, I'm not afraid of. Like there's a high risk that getting in my car and driving somewhere, I can get hit by a car and die, right? But I'm not afraid to get in my car. It's because OCD attacks our value system. And so, during that period, for whatever reason, it was attacking, things surrounding spirituality and faith. I wanted to know that I know that I knew that I know that God loved and accepted me and wasn't going to abandon me. And which isn't a bad thing to desire, right? I think everyone who has some form of faith would want that sense of security that they're, loved and accepted by God. And anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that different periods of my life have presented these different themes that OCD is latched onto.
Sure.
And it's funny that it doesn't attack things that you don't care about. So the whole point behind it is like, I'm okay with the uncertainty that OCD doesn't care about, but I can learn to accept the uncertainty that OCD may care about. And, I wish I could say that I have great days and, all the time. I don't, but I will say that over the years, I have come a long way in understanding the way my brain works and recognizing different ways that intrusive thoughts come in and compulsions arise to where I want to, essentially you're trying to mitigate and remove the anxiety surrounding the intrusive thoughts, by performing these compulsions, when in reality, all you're doing is essentially telling your body that this false alarm bell that's going off is actually a real one. So that's why I said earlier, it only reinforces your fears.
Yeah.
A very twisted thing. But anyway, That's kind of a gist of what it was doing.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a very the problem that jumps at me immediately, right, is that if one of the greatest ways that you can kind of engage with this constant need to be certain you're saved, you're this, you're that, whatever it might be, is to start to embrace a bit of uncertainty, start to open up and go, well, look, maybe I don't know, but you know, it's much more likely that happens, or, you know, like you just start to engage with that. The problem is when you are doing this within the religious context, certainly within a conventionally Christian context, you go to your pastor and say, I'm worried I'm not saved. And like, wow, here's the things you can do. Make sure you pray this prayer. Make sure you read your Bible. Make sure you pray. Make sure you, and you're like, dude, trust me, I'm doing all these things way more than you. Trust me, right? You know what I mean? It's like, you don't have to give me this list. I've scored a 99.9 on this list, and everyone else is getting like 70s. Like, trust me, I'm doing good. But that 0.01 is leaving me uncertain. And the problem is that there isn't in conventional Christianity space for uncertainty. The pastor isn't going to go, well, look, here's the deal, Derek. Honestly, none of us know we're saved. None of us even know that guy out there in the skies exists. I mean, what the fuck? I don't even know Jesus exists. You know, like, what do we know? Like, you know, like, if we're really going to start tearing apart some uncertainty, like the pastor's never going to do that. The pastor's never going to go, look, Derek, you can't know that you're saved. You can't know that you've ticked all the boxes. And really, none of us could tick the boxes. What we could actually go back and forgive every single person that spoke to us in high school, every single thing that happened to you when you were 5. Like, you could, you know, come to terms with everything. What about the times you don't remember? You know, like, the pastor isn't going to do that, right? The pastor isn't going to go there most of the time. He's going to go, well, you know, you just need to pray. You need to, you know, why don't you do some church counseling, right? So you go to Steps of Freedom and whatever crazy stuff that, like, you know, someone with the best intentions in the world, 9 times out of 10, probably way more than that, that genuinely thinks this is how we help people find freedom and find health. And maybe it works for a few people. I have no idea. It must work for someone at some point. I don't know. But it's the worst thing. It's the exact opposite of what happens. And it does seem that it creates this downward spiral. You know, you're trying to tick the Christian boxes and you're left with this little nagging down of going, that's not enough. And that niggling down is huge. It's not, it's little, right? So it's like what we were talking about earlier, right? You're having a complete meltdown and everyone's like, dude, it's just your phone ringing. And it's like, no, it's not just my phone ringing. It's my phone ringing and this is happening and that's happening. And I can't even think straight. And I got to think about this next Wednesday. And I'm worried about this and I'm worried about that. And the phone ringing has just set me over the edge. It's the same deal as like this little thing that is just a tiny little doubt. We all have tiny little doubts. It's like, no, this is like center, main stage, all I can concentrate on. It doesn't matter that I'm scoring a 99.9 on the test. I need 100. Like, it just, it feels like, a lot of systemic conventional Christianity is built from the ground up around the belief that we have the absolute belief that we are absolutely forgiven, that we've absolutely the right box, that we're in, that we're not out. And it draws these lines, right? There's in and out. There's no like, oh, we're all kind of somewhere on some sort of spectrum of figuring out what the fuck's going on. Like, so if there's an in and an out, then all we can do is obsess about, am I in or out then? Like, have I done enough? Like,
exactly.
The whole system seems completely incapable. And like you said, you know, like, it's not that most people have the best intentions. Like, pastors, though, haven't been trained, generally speaking. They've maybe done like a 2-week course in Bible college on counseling or something like that, you know, like, or maybe they did like 1 term on counseling. And even then, what that was often was like, oh, you sit and you listen to them and you pray with them at the end. Or it's not like, you know, okay, let's sit down and let's look at some different issues that people might have going on. Let's look at some neurotypical components and how that plays with faith. Let's look at whatever.
I literally had in Bible college someone like the professor in a intro to discipleship counseling say to me and the class that the DSM was essentially like completely invalid. Like, any sort of like psychology is just BS, and it's all sin issues. It's all just a lack of believing the gospel. That's the kind of fucking bullshit I had to deal with.
Right. I bet you had a good week that week, right?
Honestly, I remember one class, Phil. I had to walk out because I actually felt like I was being choked. I was so riddled with anxiety
Yeah.
that I it felt like I couldn't breathe. Like that's how like dark some of the shit that they were saying that just was so inconsistent with reality, right? And I think one of the hardest things too for me was going back to what you were saying about even having pastors model like the uncertainty, the vulnerability, right? Everybody feels like they need to put on this face that they've got a pristine, untouchable faith. I think one of the beauties of deconstruction is we're all just being like, fuck, what do we have to prove to anyone? We like, let's be honest for a second that, this isn't so dualistic and plain and simple. The Bible doesn't clearly say like all these things that we've been given as constructed system of certainty that's like so nice, neat, and tidy. After a while, if you really, really take it seriously, it doesn't all work in reality. Like, that's not to say all Christian practice. I still consider myself a Christian, even though I really hate the term. That's not to say all facets and practices of Christian faith is wrong, but the whole like neat, tidy box of, absolutes that it's all black and white. It's so clear. It's so matter of fact. It just does not work when you actually try to live it out fully. And that's the thing, especially with someone who deals with OCD, makes me feel alone because
yes,
here I am doing everything. Like I would be going and sharing the gospel with people and, praying for people and all these things, like doing all the things, right? Like even like the above beyond extra credit things that a lot of people wouldn't do. And here I am suffering more than I can even begin to articulate.
Yeah.
And largely it had to do with because I looked around me and everybody else seemed like, it's good. I'm good. Yeah. No. So you mean I'm the only one, even OCD aside, I'm the only one who's plagued with some of these things? And to me, it's like, either are we being fully honest, or it's like, how much cognitive dissonance do we have to practice to maintain the sense that, oh no, everything's fine. Everything's good. No, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I just
absolutely. Yeah. It's such a tough one because, I think of, and I've known like maybe 2 or 3 people that I would have from an external point of view go, maybe they've got some of this going on. And I'm thinking as a different person now, but this other person, I mean, like they've left their jobs so they can be more committed and pray more and fast more and whatever. And they, like they had homeless people come and stay with them in their house because, well, Jesus would expect that. Like, how on earth could I have a spare room in my house and not have it full of homeless people? And they get themselves into really dangerous situations. And of course, I'm not saying having a homeless person in your house is dangerous, not at all. Like, but out in the streets doing all sorts of things like, giving every penny to every person, they're going to, end up on the streets themselves. Like, there's never enough. There's this constant thing. Right. And what's funny is you talk to them and they think you are the greatest Christian that ever existed. And I'm like, trust me, compared to you, I feel like shit. Like, that's how I felt most of my life. Look around, a couple of people that I've known quite closely, that I'm like, dude, you make me feel like a terrible Christian. That's how I feel, right? And they are like, no, you are so, oh man, I wish I had your faith. I wish I could, and there's some picture they have of me that, trust me, I have no idea what the fuck they're using to draw that picture because it's not me. But they beat themselves up. And I'm like, dude, do you have any idea how much, if we're doing some sort of pissing contest, like I am drowning in your piss, like it's everywhere, like you win, like, do you know what I mean? But there's no capacity. And I think it's such a hard thing. I think of people that are in that because, it's really awesome that in some way, shape or form, you managed to come to terms with, oh, this is a component that's at play. You started to be able to work through that. It's dovetailed well with deconstructing, and you've been able to still hold on to your faith, and that's beautiful for you. That works for you. In the midst of all that, it's not being the sort of thing of like, I have to burn this whole shit down because I can't even touch it. Like, that's amazing that you've managed to navigate this in so many ways that I, from an external point of view, go, wow, that's really gone very well compared to how, if I was to imagine how it could go, it seems like it could have gone a lot worse. But I think of the people I know that are in the midst of this, and they're still in the midst of conventional Christianity. And, you mentioned, someone could have pulled you aside and gone, look, here's the deal or whatever. And I just don't know how one approaches someone in that space in a way that doesn't, you're just going to be one of Job's friends. You're just another person testing me. You're just a thorn in my side. You're sent by Satan. You're tickling my ears. Whatever, right? Or you're just trying to water down my faith. You want me to go to therapy rather than speaking to the pastor about it. Or like, there's so many obstacles to get through that. Well, what would you say it was for you that managed to kind of like become a tipping point where you could see it, you could hear it, you could engage with it? Like, because to me, I feel that most people I've come across, that's not something that's going to be an easy thing to get through, a barrier or whatever. Like, that's just not going to swing wide open for most people, it doesn't feel. So what was it for you that was it situational? Was it the people involved?
I'm a pretty forgiving person, I guess, or a pretty easygoing person. I don't know how to fully articulate it, but I try to find the bright side and the good in situations. So I think even through that, like, and at that time, I mean, I was so ensconced in that sort of worldview of certainty and binaries and very evangelical, that I thought that was the antidote, how people were approaching me. Well, doubt your doubts and just, really just stand on the word and all these unhelpful spiritual bypassing statements that inevitably happens when you've been in the church for some period of time. And I had some really great friends who were with me through it, but they didn't, and it's not on them, but like, they didn't know how to be there for me fully. And I understand that. I mean, they weren't given the tools to know how to understand someone who's dealing with an undiagnosed mental health condition. Right. And in fact, I don't know if you've heard this, but there's some study that was done, and OCD is one of the hardest disorders to live with. Even like it's up there with some physical conditions too. And so, I mean, it just, there's a lot of, another thing that's unhelpful is how pop culture portrays OCD, right? And other conditions as well with mental health, just the stigma surrounding it. When you hear OCD typically in pop culture, what do you hear, Phil?
I mean, everyone's like, oh, I'm a little bit OCD, or, like, it's like I worry if I check the oven, I check it's off 3 times, or, and it's the same thing. Right. Like, everyone can be a bit ADHD, or, we all throw around these terms as kind of like a blanket. Oh, obsessive compulsive. I just like, I am a bit clean, a bit more clean than most people, or a bit more, compulsive about remembering things, or
Sure. Yeah. So it's, exactly that. It's, everybody's a little bit OCD, or, I'm just so OCD about not needing to have everything organized and in order and clean, So there's these stigmas. And what that does is it reduces people's understanding of the complexity that is a very real disorder. And same with ADHD, same with, other forms of neurodiversity and other forms of just mental health conditions in general. I mean, the fact of the matter is that when people think they have an understanding of it, they just check it off like, oh yeah, OCD, it's the issue with needing things to be clean, you're afraid of germs or something. Not quite. So why I bring that up is that affects people who are in faith spaces and non-faith spaces, right?
Yeah.
And the way that it affected me, obviously, was that I wasn't given the proper direction or encouragement to go, just like, hey, if I broke my leg and I was walking around with a broken leg and constant pain, oh my gosh, people wouldn't be like, oh, well, maybe some people would be, oh, you should just pray about it. No, you should fucking go to the doctor and get an X-ray because you probably broke your leg. Yeah, we've in some ways created this hierarchy of importance when it comes to health, and I think we're starting to see a shift slowly happen, where mental health is starting to rise to the same level of importance as physical health because it's all connected anyway. But like, yeah, you would tell your friend, dude, you broke your leg, go to the doctor, get taken care of. And I hope that as all of us begin to just culturally gain a better sense of awareness and education and access to information, that we would be able to have that same level of support for those in our lives that, the things that they're going through probably aren't so random. If you're seeing the same thing come up consistently, why not? Why not go to see a therapist? I mean, no matter where you're at in particular mental health cycles or where you feel you may be in life, I mean, therapy is just generally beneficial. I mean, people go to get physicals regularly just as a way of having, consistent staying on top of your health. You go to the dentist regularly, to make sure that you don't get cavities. I mean, all these things, right? It's maintenance. And, especially for people who are actually suffering, to not present to them a credible means of finding healing and comfort, it's just, it's kind of negligent. But at the same time, I don't want to make it seem like, oh, people, because they're ignorant to it, it's their fault, No,
of course.
So.
And it's hard because a lot of people that grow up within churches are actively pushed away from educating themselves around the topics of mental health and things like that, because those are just demonic, or those are just the worldly things. We focus on spiritual, everything's a sin, everything's a demon, everything's and so you can't fault Barbara in the prayer ministry for when you go to her for prayer and say, hey, I'm worried about this and I'm really I'm extremely obsessive and compulsive about, am I saved or not? And she'll be like, well, let's pray about it. That's her go-to tool. That's everything she knows. And she'll go, and maybe it's a demon, because I've been told that that's often a demon. She's not going to go, interesting. I was just reading an article on OCD and how it can affect people's religion, and so it's never to beat people up. But I think, we all, especially maybe, people listen to this are maybe slightly on the outside, or a good portion of people that deconstruct are still Christians, still even involved in local church. As you're still identify, maybe is a little harder with the label, but as Christian. So a lot of us are still in a church, and we might be exposed to some people like this. And I think it's really important that maybe us who are a bit more open to being educated, are a bit more capable of helping in a non-typical way within the church. It's important for us to think about how can we help someone like that? How can I come alongside that person and try and figure out, how do I come in a way that comes maybe under the radar? They've got their guard up against some worldly stuff, tricking them, or this. And so we've got to figure out and be quite intentional, really intentional, in fact, and especially not even just to help them, but to not trigger it and make it worse, which I can imagine a lot of people can do. A lot of the Christian things that get thrown around and said probably would make it worse. Oh, well, Derek, have you considered it could be a hidden sin in your life?
Yeah.
Okay, gosh. Jesus, there goes like 2 weeks, right? It's just like, oh God, that's the worst thing ever. When you've already covered, Billy, who bullied you at 6, Trust me, the hidden sins, we have covered as many hidden sins as we can find.
Man,
but there's always another thing, right? There's always something else. There's always, something we can find and pick apart. And I think that's the problem with a lot of these kind of confessional modes of salvation and ticking the boxes. Like, God, I've just had 20 thoughts in the last 5 minutes while talking to you. And I guarantee if I was still a Christian, 3 of them would have been, 10 of them, 19 of them would have been something I have to ask for forgiveness for. And it's like, how do you keep up? There's endless options of things that we can lose our salvation over, or lose our whatever, our right standing with God, or he'll remove his hedge of protection, or, whatever it is.
Yeah, that, God's hand and anointing won't be on us as much, or you're gonna not be able to hear God's voice as much, or whatever it may be. There's always some consequence. It's always some threat of the hammer coming down. Oh, if you don't do this, then this is gonna happen. You know what I mean? And it's like the entire worldview is constructed around fear. Yeah. And fear is a horrible atmosphere for any sort of trust. Fear cannot, or trust cannot grow in an environment of fear. And trust for oneself, trust for one's experience, trust for one's, relationships, and trust to the divine, like that cannot be fostered in an environment that's predicated upon fear. Like, and like having this eternal torment hang in the balance. I mean, what really started my deconstruction, and I know we've talked about this on, our last time together, hell was the beginning of my deconstruction when I became a dad and I looked at my son and thought, wait a minute. Okay. So I'm an earthly dad who looks at his son with so much love. I could never, ever, no matter what he did, ever think about like harming him, number one. And number two, think about like eternally harming him. You know what I mean? And beyond that, like thinking, okay, well, if that's me and I'm more merciful than God, either we've got something wrong, or like this is all fucked, right? Like something's off. Yeah. Like I can't be more merciful and loving than God. I can't be more kind and forgiving than God. Like what? If God is supposed to be the ultimate, like love, right? And being that, the Christian confession would be that God is love, right? How does that in any way, shape, or form resemble in the same breath a willing torment of people who are God's children? And so that was the beginning of like my questioning and doing. And I think a lot of removing that big threat of hell and fear and all these things began to open my eyes to see love and goodness and hope and reason for trust to thrive and flourish spiritually for me. And that even if I don't have certainty, which I've learned that I don't need when it comes to my worldview, that's one, it's not a surprise to God. And number two, like, what do I have to prove? Like, I'm not giving this performance to put on a show so that God gives me the, 2 thumbs up, so that I make it into the pearly gates. I don't know. I don't mean to get on a tangent, but my whole point was when I started to really do the hard work of learning that, okay, eternal conscious torment is bullshit, to put it really bluntly. There's so much misunderstanding around hell, especially around the 4 words used for it, throughout, the Old and New Testament. But as I began to unpack that, it was like letting the air out of the balloon, if you will, and slowly deflating this fear that was just swelling within me for so long. Yeah. This fear of will I ever be good enough for God? And I think that's what drove, it was like the gas, the petrol in the tank, if you will, for me to, with religious OCD.
Yeah.
That fear of, will I be good enough? Will I be good enough? Am I good enough?
Yeah.
And that only drove the need for certainty to go that much more frenetic. It just craved it. It had to have that certainty and that sense of, and I think that all of that was kind of the beginning of my deconstruction before I had formal language for it. And it was in that time, actually, and I know you and I kind of come from a little bit of a similar background. I don't know if we've talked about this, but like the whole grace movement, right? I feel like that's like the gateway drug into.
That's what they warned.
What's that? Yeah.
They were warning about it.
But no, I mean, really, like rethinking everything around grace was kind of the beginning when I was in my evangelical days. It's like, whoa, like there's so much here. And then that was kind of like the doorway through into this place of rethinking everything surrounding faith. So I think ultimately when it comes down to it, if we can't create an environment where we're honest about uncertainty, especially for those who are suffering with things like religious OCD, like I've gone through, then we're just going to continue to encourage either people to fake it or people to feel a lot of shame when they're not, quote unquote, measuring up to the ideal.
Yeah.
And I think what all of us are looking for, whether we, don't love this term, but reconstruct or not, is having honesty in our worldview and empathy and real love for one another and a real openness to mystery and a removal of the dualistic and binary thinking that creates this removes this reality of uncertainty, right? The very real nature that life doesn't exist in a set of very clear absolutes, despite what evangelicals say about the scriptures and whatnot. And I think that there's a lot of freedom in that. There's something human about us not needing to have things figured out, but that we're together in that. Yes. I think that's what everybody wants. We crave connection and knowing that it's safe to not have the answers and to not know and to be scared, to be fucking scared of this sometimes very hard existence that we live. Yeah. We all have in one shape or form some trauma and some pain and various, struggles that we go through, whether it's depression or anxiety or ADHD or OCD or whatever it may be that we're up against. I mean, these are very, very real experiences that people go through, oftentimes without knowing it, and it's to their own personal detriment, unfortunately. Yeah. I know, I'm sure you can attest, Phil, like, you had hoped that you had some language for this stuff surrounding mental health, like years and years ago. But all that to be said, I think one thing that I hope for, beyond just the obvious of having more education in the church with mental health, would just be that we as humans collectively, we give a lot of grace and understanding for all of us who are just figuring it out. We're all just fucking figuring this thing out, whether we want to be completely real about it or not. So
yeah, it's a much more beautiful world having space to not know for sure. And I think you have the benefit of starting your deconstruction with hell. I talk to a lot of people. I know you guys talk to a lot of people, and you'll have heard the same thing, that one of the most common things that people are worried about is being wrong when they deconstruct. And what about hell, right? I mean, those are the big worries, because if you still have hell looming over you, if you're still thinking that God might send you to hell if you are wrong, and it's still about being right and not wrong. That's really hard to deconstruct, right? It's really hard to start deconstructing on what does God think about LGBTQ.
Right.
Because if you're wrong, you're going to hell. Whereas if you start and go, hell, oh gosh, no one actually knows. Oh, even throughout the church history, no one's ever really said this is the one thing that you're allowed to do. And the entire church agreed with it. No one agreed on hell at any point throughout the entire Christian church. Oh, and the Jews, gosh, they didn't even believe in it, right? Up until like really late days, they stole some Zoroastrian stuff from the Babylonians and said, oh, let's make up an idea called hell. Like, that's really late. And so you start to look at it and you go, oh, well, no point worrying too much about it then if no one can agree and is actually sure that this is even a thing. The benefit of doing that and then starting to question lots of things is if you're looking at a big spectrum of options and going, well, no one can agree, and you go, yeah, but the one that looks most like Jesus is that it'll be fine, right? So you start worrying, like, I don't see Jesus burning anyone forever in eternity. Like, so that seems like a bad one to hedge all our bets on. So let's really hedge our bets on Jesus loves people and he'll let people be with him forever. Once you start seeing it that way, suddenly you're like, oh, so I'm free to actually explore some of these ideas without worrying about consequences. And so it's really interesting, that you talk about that. And I think creating uncertainty about the big issues that kind of that sit above all other choices in our life, every single choice, right? If I come and talk to you as a friend of mine that I think maybe has some religious OCD, and I can maybe try and help steer you towards therapy or something like that, but you still think that if I have taught you something wrong and you go to therapy and you're going to go to hell for doing it, you're going to be really wary. If you're starting to open up and question and explore hell and like study it or whatever, I think generally speaking, all you need to do is start studying hell, and very quickly that thing falls apart. There's certain things that suddenly you're much more open. You're like, well, I'm not worried about going to hell. I'm not worried about being quote unquote wrong, because there isn't a clear right here. And God, if he was really obsessed with a right, would have given us something to absolutely believe here, but he didn't.
Well, and that's the thing, that the mind fuck about it is that a lot of people have been told that there is only one way to think about it, right? Well, the Bible clearly says hell here, and the Bible clearly talks about destruction, and people don't realize all of the interpretive biases even that go into Bible translation, and all of those things that, again, come with taking the time to study and to learn, and through deconstruction that many people do. But and that's the thing that's so that bothers me so much about just our current framework for the church, right? Is that we don't take like an ecumenical approach in teaching things, right? Hey, this is how I come to understand it, right? Can you imagine this from the pulpit? Hey, this is how I come to understand it, but here are like 4 other people's views on this.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes.
Can you imagine that? Like, honestly, like,
dude, I was preaching at my church, the last church I was a part of, and I preached at church a lot, and they had a Bible school and I taught there a lot. And generally speaking, I just taught, what we all believed at the church or whatever. And one of the last, in fact, I think second last time I ever spoke there. And the only reason I got speak again is because it was my wife with me. Spoke there, and they asked me to speak about the cross. And I was like, I would love to. And so I sat down and I basically gave them 7 different atonement theories that are the main overarching atonement theories. And I was like, so here's the most common one in today's group within Protestant Christianity, is this idea, but actually it's really, really, really new. So let's take a few steps back and start looking at what do the rest of the church believe in? What do we believe historically? And I'm opening up ransom theory and, like whatever, moral theory. And honestly, I would have been better saying, Jesus Christ didn't die on a cross. Fuck you all. I hope you die. I feel like that would have been a better sermon. I got so much flack for giving people options and leaving it at the end going, I feel I have my own conviction, but I'm not even going to tell you which one I lean towards. I want you to think through these and think about it and think about your relationship with God and Jesus and what seems most like that and fits with that the most, that you feel would work with your relationship and work with your life. And people lost it. They just want me to say which is the theory on the cross that's right, which is the atonement. They don't want options. People don't want an option. we don't want an option on hell. We'd rather you told me that people will burn in hell than to go, well, actually, we're not entirely sure what the afterlife looks like. No, give me the certainty. And I don't know what that is. Is that a human nature thing? Is it because we've been in a church system that has black and white system duality for hundreds of years that we expect it now? I'm not sure what it is, but it's fascinating because I want to live in that world. I want to live in the world where like we throw out 7 ideas and we sit in a circle and discuss and go, well, I like this one because of that. And people go, yeah, but I'm not sure about this. Well, that's a good point. Like, that's my idea of a perfect, if there was a church, I don't even particularly feel remotely inclined to go to a church day in, day out, or week in, week out. But I would love to go along to that just for the philosophical arguments and discussions. It'd be interesting.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, and I'm by no means any way, shape, or form anywhere close to being well read on rabbinic tradition, but to my knowledge, that is a lot of how things happen. I mean, there were different schools of thought, different people who followed those schools of thought, but they held tension for a lot of disagreement, and that's kind of how they functioned around truth. Like, there wasn't just one truth. There was. It was like the diamond that each way you turn it, there's another way of seeing it, another way for the light to refract, through the prism that is that diamond. And I find it really interesting that, and I don't know if it's a Western thing because, we come from an Eastern, context with Judaism springing up from the East. And then somehow, when it all came together after the early church was formed and got to Rome, everything changed. Surprise, surprise. But the whole thing with that is there was room for disagreement. There was strength in each counter argument. I remember Rob Bell talking about on a podcast, I don't remember which one, but he was talking about how, this same topic, and he was preparing for his sermon on Leviticus or something that like changed his life. And he said he read a book by a rabbi who each chapter was a different argument for the same passage or something like that.
I love it.
And it's just so interesting because I think as humans, like you were saying, there's this need, this craving for certainty, whether you have OCD or not. I think we all crave it. However, that's the danger of dogmatic fundamentalist religion, is that you try to construct this system of absolutes and these unquestionable tenets of faith. But when it doesn't necessarily check out for everyone, which it's inevitable, then instead of re-examining as a whole, those people are just automatically gaslit and wrong.
Yeah.
Which is what many of us experience when we deconstruct, right? But the fact of the matter is that if we approach things with giving people freedom over their spirituality and their faith, giving people this sense of, even within a communal context of dialogue and discussion, and hey, I'm not going to tell you absolutely what it is because nobody knows. Like, there's so many different opinions and scholarly takes and on the very same, issue. Just like you did with presenting those atonement theories throughout church history. But there's this ignorance, I think, that's existent especially within American evangelicalism, that I think has to do with a lot of American exceptionalism too. That we have it all figured out. We are the shining example that our nation, our ideals, our church system, the way that we've experienced things, this is the only way. Well, not only is it ignorant in the sense of other people's experiences and other cultures and backgrounds and faiths and worldviews, but it's entirely ignorant of church history. And that's what bothers me. And what I loved about what you were saying with your, the last time that you preached, like that should be a normal thing where people are being exposed to the context in which our beliefs have been formed. Like you were saying, penal substitutionary atonement is a relatively newer construct if you're looking at the entire span of church history. Biblical inerrancy, even newer. The whole craziness around the rapture, even newer. I mean, like all these things that people have, hedged their bets on are ideas that they've taken for granted and have not realized have arisen from a particular context.
Yeah.
Theology doesn't exist in a vacuum. I remember a Bible college professor, though I have a lot of bad feelings surrounding that experience overall, there were some silver linings, I guess, in between. And a Bible college professor had said, theology always arises out of a particular context. And so what we believe today in 21st century, existence, or our experience within evangelicalism, or whoever may still be kind of coming out of that, like there's a reason that those things that you've been told are true, that people have, are spouting that as the absolute truth. People are trained in seminaries where they're only given, depending on where they go, one vein of thought, right?
Yeah.
And that one vein of thought becomes the vein of thought that they then,
repeat.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah. No, and you know what? It's exciting, and maybe we can finish up on a positive note, is that theology arises from context, and theology can still arise from this context of broken, disgusting, horrendous forms of Christianity.
yes.
Can a beautiful form of Christianity arise? Can we have more inclusive, more loving, more, dare I say, Christ-like forms of theology arise, and people live like that? Because a huge portion of people at Deconstruct still want to follow the path of Jesus. They still identify in many ways as Christians, but they don't feel permission to do so. There feels like there's some sort of gatekeeping on, like, well, can you be a Christian or not? And the truth is, you know what? The bunch of crazy people that thought we're going to go with this woman's vision from the Hebrides Islands in Scotland, and we're going to say that there's going to be a rapture and this and that. They were the nut job crazy people, totally fringe Christians that became the norm. And you know what? The crazy guy that was like, hey, you know what? It's penal substitution atonement. God wanted to kill everyone, but instead he killed Jesus and everything's fine. Like, he was the crazy guy, right? He got kicked out of church. He got like lambasted. He got smeared and shamed, and like there was a campaign against him. And he kind of won in a lot of ways, although the Catholic Church is doing pretty great. But this movement of Protestantism is doing good. And it arose from something. And so can we have, queer theology arise? Can we have, inclusive, universalistic theologies?
Yeah.
And some of these theologies have existed always as well, which is interesting.
Yes.
But can we have them become more prominent? And I think the answer is yes, we can. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how that works, and I personally am not that invested in doing so. It's not what I feel called to. Maybe you feel a bit more called to. I'd imagine, looking at some of your stuff. But yeah, I think there's a lot of hope for people that want to still follow the way of Jesus. The people that are still passionate about following that path, to do so in new and amazing ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there needs to be a reimagining. And I think that if you look at church history, there's always been cycles of dysfunction and harm and awful injustice, and then periods that come out of it that tend to be a little bit healthier, and then it kind of falls back, and it's this, you even see it through various popes, in the Catholic Church, who, if you look all the way back, remember there were really, really horrible popes that were basically just pawns of the empire, and some that were more genuine and benevolent in more ways. But all that to be said, I don't know what if I want to even use the language of calling or whatever, but I do have a desire to see, like you said, a more inclusive, a universal church that is embracing of all people and perspective, because I believe in a panentheism that, God is within all and all is within God. And, if we even want to go more to the scriptures, right? you know, humans are made in the image and likeness of God. And, you know, that's just another way of saying that everyone is a child of God, right? And so if I believe that, then I believe that everyone carries the DNA of the divine, then I believe that people's experiences matter, and they're valid, and they're important. And, you know, as much as we want to think that we've got it all figured out because, you know, of what we come to understand of the person of Jesus and the scriptures and all these things, doesn't mean that there's not validity and truth and other worldviews and other faiths that are so beautiful. You know, and when you think in a very us versus them binary framework, that seems like a threat to your faith. Well, if I believe that other perspectives are carry truth, then maybe I'm wrong. Well, oh my gosh, what if there is a bit of more that's wrong in what you believe than you are comfortable with accepting? You know, what if you can benefit from having a listening ear instead of looking to proselytize and convert people? What if we converted everyone to love? You know what I mean? Like, what if that was, and that's the essence of inclusivity, and having a mentality of not operating any form of dogmatic sort of structure, is that you don't need to be right. There's no threat against you if you know you take the posture of curiosity, and you're genuinely wanting to learn from other people, you know, and it's conversational. It's not and you know, apologetic, right? Where you got to disprove their argument and you know, really show them that this is the answer, you know, sort of thing. I think there's something beautiful in finding validity in the worldviews of those around us. It allows us for us to be more compassionate, and allows us for us to have more gentleness to other people and ourselves, right? Because again, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, we're all just trying to figure this thing out. And as much as we would hope for certainty in what we want to believe in, you know, we can't discount our tradition or maybe our biases. There's always room for you to humbly admit you're wrong. There's always room to be like, you know, actually there's validity into other perspectives and what they want to say. And you don't have to feel threatened about it. Yeah. So yeah.
So good. It's great. It's great. We're running out of time. I want to make sure you get back to your day. But if people want to connect with you, follow you, I mean, there's the amazing account, Your Favorite Heretics, right? Instagram and Facebook, you're on there. Is there any other ways that people can connect with you and what you're doing?
Yeah. So, definitely our Instagram at Your Favorite Heretics is where we're most active. You know, you can find me on Twitter, Derek the Heretic, sticking with the theme. Those are probably the two most active places that we've been. For those who are looking for a very inclusive community of people who are deconstructing on various places of the spectrum, Phil, I know you've got a great, you know, the deconstruction network and all that stuff. We have our Facebook, private Facebook group, which has been pretty awesome to see the discussion, the support. We've had this desire from the very beginning of this, or you know, some time into it, when it kind of took a form of its own that we weren't entirely expecting, to really foster a space for people to feel safe. You know, like, oh, I can heal. I don't have to have my guard up. I can be genuine about my pain and frustrations and my questions, and, you know, laugh about silly things from our fundamentalist days and all these things. So there's the humor and people sharing memes and laughing together. And there's also the heavy of sharing screenshots from judgmental family members and everything in between, of just finding that support, finding that community that's really hard to come by. I mean, I know for me, that's one of the things I miss most about being in church, is having that consistent and like intentional relationships with people where you're having, meaningful discussion, or you feel like, you're sharing your life. So I really think that space has been really useful for that. And I'm very thankful for that group.
No, it's great. It's the number one place I point people to. There's a few Discord channels for people with Patrons and different things. I've got one of those, and Dirt Around churches and stuff. But like, as far as a space, it's just open, free, there for people. I always point people to your Facebook group, and so it's an amazing space. It's really great. I'm not on Facebook anymore, but so I don't even ever see it. So, but
if I could, I probably wouldn't either.
Oh God, I hate Facebook with a passion. Words can't describe. So yeah. Anyway,
the metaverse.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. It was great to chat.
Thank you, Phil. It was a lot of fun. Really good time. Always having conversation together. So we'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let you know when it's live. I think we'll be putting this out next week, so I'll give you a message or whatever then. But cool. Good to see you, man.
Hey, my computer is still frozen too, so I've been just like winging it.
Talking to like a frozen Phil. Yeah.
No, really, you've got this very serious look on your face. Like
I do that. My default look is very intense. Yeah.
But it's just funny because I'm like trying to imagine like your facial expressions, and I'm like trying to like stay engaged. And I'm like, I hope I'm not making inappropriate facial like expressions.
That's so funny. It would be my worst nightmare. I hate talking on the phone because I can't see people's faces. I almost exclusively do video. Even people that are like, oh, I'm not comfortable having my video on my face on the internet or anything. I'm like, can we still do a video call? I'll just black out your fit, like the video, and we'll use just audio, but I need to see you to have a real conversation. So well done. I'm impressed. You did well.
I tried.
Oh, cool, man. It's funny. All right. Love you, man. Catch you later. Yeah.
Yeah. Love you too. See you later.
I'm waving as well. It means nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. Peace.
Bye.
If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.